Okay, James, so we've talked a lot lately about security, and we've been in a big security mindset focus lately and wondering about things we can do proactively to be in a better place security wise. And one of the things we've talked about is how to get more stakeholders in the school district involved in security so that, security isn't just a technical problem. So it affects everybody in the district, from students to bus drivers to janitors to teachers to lunch ladies to directors and principals. So one of the things we're going to look at is doing a tabletop exercise. So do you have any experience doing tabletop exercises, or do you have any context, or have you had any experience or exposure?
I've not actually gone through a legit tabletop exercise. I've only conceptually talked about what happens when our internet goes down, what happens when we lose power. I mean, we lose power so often around here that I'm always thinking about what's plan B, how am I going to get services restored. And so I think that there's a lot of merit to doing these type of exercises because it makes you think different and be prepared for when those things happen.
Yeah, and so we've talked about tabletops before, probably several times over the course of a couple of years. What do you think some obstacles are for why we've not done one with our district yet?
I think we are consistently dealing with the things that would happen in a tabletop exercise. And we have enough of the little small things that people are asking questions about that we get so full in our time that we don't have time to think about what if, because it's happening.
Right. Yeah. So we've got that very real time constraint on our side of we're just trying to solve problems, or we don't have as much time to devote to being proactive. And then I think another thing from my point of view, from the leadership side, is trying to get everybody else on board and trying to loop in other stakeholders and, convince, the director of finance that it's worthwhile to sit in with us to talk about something cybersecurity related. And then also the human resources director and the communications director and the director of schools, and getting all those people on board seems a little daunting, and a tabletop can seem pretty complicated. And so what I wanted for us to walk through today is looking at how you can really simplify the tabletop process. Because at the end of the day, a tabletop is just a conversation. So we're going to pose a scenario, and we're going to talk through the scenario. And today it's just me and James walking through this tabletop. But this is something, the same format could work equally well with, a group of a half dozen stakeholders and be done in less than half an hour. So, really the goal in what we're talking about today is to try to demystify doing a tabletop and make it less scary. And so, so what we're going to do, the cornerstone of a tabletop is a scenario. And since we're talking about cybersecurity, usually cybersecurity, you're thinking, okay, I'm worried about hackers. I'm worried about, well, what would you worry about? If I said we're going to worry about something cybersecurity related, what are the things you're concerned about, James? Just high level.
I think the first thing that comes to mind really easy is a threat actor. And are they coming from the internet, or are they coming from something that our users did?
Right. Yeah. And so and we can certainly take a tabletop in that direction. But to start out, you want to stay as simple as possible. So, as you get some practice and you do this more, make more complicated scenarios. But we're going to start out really super simple with something very realistic. And we're going to say that our scenario is that there's construction going on at one of our schools, and the construction has cut the fiber. That would never happen, would it, James?
Yeah, it happened a few weeks ago.
Yeah. So this is one that we've had happen multiple times. So it's one of those scenarios James mentioned with, we're always responding to these things. And so in this scenario, there's nothing malicious. No student was hacking their Chromebook. No NSA agent or North Korean actor was, social engineering our users or anything like that. Just somebody on a bulldozer hit something they shouldn't have. So this has resulted in a complete loss of Wi-Fi and all of our external connectivity across all campuses. So obviously that's going to disrupt instruction, because how does that impact instruction?
So a lot of the content today that the students are consuming is coming from a web browser. and a lot of online content, a lot of really, really great tools that's helping augment what the teacher's doing in the classroom. The downside is when the internet's down, you can't access any of that content, and they have to revert to their plan B to instruct the kids.
Right. So this is major curveball. So I think the closest analogy to when I was a kid would be when the power would go out at school. And then literally you're sitting in the dark and can't even see the teacher doing things. And so, in the classroom when that would happen, we were, as students, we all started talking about like, okay, how long does it have to be out before
school gets canceled?
So I'm sure when this happens now, those same kinds of discussions are going on with kids. So that's going to be our scenario. And we're going to look at it with this timeline. So timeline of events is that at 8:15, so right before the bell rings in the morning to start the day, teachers report that they cannot access online resources and students are unable to log into their devices. That's kind of that first tier alert. So just functionally from our side, on the support side, James, what's happening when we start to get those reports?
We're ultimately looking to see and if we can localize the problem and find out that is it system-wide or is it limited to one school. We're calling, we're driving to the site, we're trying to figure out and ascertain where the problem is, triage it as quickly as possible so that we can come up with an action plan.
Yeah, and so as we're doing that, 8:30, the help desk tickets surge. We start having principals from multiple sites starting to call our tech office. And then as the support team kind of completes that process James was mentioning, by 9 o'clock, the technology director confirms that we have a district-wide outage. And so at that point, we've trying to localize it, we've decided that it's district-wide impactful loss of internet. From a network administrator perspective, what are you kind of doing at that point?
So I'm confirming with the network tools that in parallel that we have a district-wide outage and driving over to the place that we have our main internet connection to see and confirm there that internet is truly down at the core as well as everywhere else.
Okay. And so from the point of view of district leadership, at this point, they've not really truly been involved with this problem. Like maybe they've gotten a notification email or a text message saying, hey, we've had reported that the internet's out. You obviously are noticing it yourself. We're investigating. That's kind of the level of involvement district leadership has had at this point. And so eventually in this scenario around 10 o'clock, so a couple of hours later, our service provider is going to report that they've detected they've determined that a construction crew has caused a fiber cut. Now for us, we have kind of ongoing construction projects all the time. So one of the first things we jump to when there's a problem is, did construction cut the fiber? So we maybe, because we have that history, we may have caught that a little bit sooner. But that's kind of the flow. And from there, so at this point, we know what the problem is. And the ISP gives us a repair time of 12 to 18 hours. Shortly after, parents start calling it because kids are texting, they're telling their parents like, hey, the internet's out, and rumors fly. So rumors are everywhere when it comes to a school. And so, there start to be murmurs that the school systems were hacked, whatever. And then by afternoon, the district is faced with a decision point. Should after-school tutoring and testing be canceled? Should the district issue a public statement? Is school going to be on course for tomorrow? Will athletic events be able to take place? All those kinds of things. So that's kind of the timeline for the events. And what we're going to do is the heart of a tabletop is doing role-based discussions. And so we're going to break this up into multiple different stakeholder point of views. So if you're conducting a tabletop with a group of people, it's useful to get these types of roles in the room so that you've discussed this and gone through these kinds of scenarios before it really happens. And so we're going to start with the superintendent. And if you're doing a tabletop, these are the kinds of questions for this scenario that you may pose to the superintendent and say things like, what is the priority for keeping learning and operations moving during this outage? So at this point, really what's going on in the classroom isn't the responsibility of the technology department. Is that fair to say?
I think so.
So we've obviously, their main resource is the internet, and it's not there. But with its absence, technology isn't filling in for that. So it's the part of district leadership, principals, instructional leaders to say, okay, what do we expect to be happening with our teachers in the classrooms? And so having that discussion with the superintendent so they've thought through this before it actually happens is beneficial. The superintendent's also going to be you would also want to pose a question like, how do you reassure parents and the school board that this isn't a cyber attack? So do you come out with communication quickly? How directed is it? Is it vague? Is it open-ended? Or do you just say, hey, we've had this event. This is what happened. We absolutely know the cause. This is the estimated time to recovery. Or do you just say, hey, we're aware of a problem. We're working and we'll give updates. So I've seen different approaches from different districts, different leaders. A lot of times the kind of the rule of thumb is to say the least amount possible so that you don't have to backtrack or that you don't have to, correct yourself or if it ends up being something else. So that flavored differently district by district. So then you're asking the superintendent the questions of, do you cancel or reschedule activities? So say that we've had this happen before where a dump truck hit a telephone pole, knocked out fiber for half of our schools on the first day of state testing online. So that's a good question is, at what point do you change your instructional day or your plans as a district? And, kind of a piggyback to this, in this specific scenario, I don't think it's an issue. But if the outage is going to last 2, 3, 4 days, you start to have questions about, do you still hold school? So, everyone's gut reaction is, of course you hold school. Just because there's no technology doesn't mean that you don't have school. But what are some things that maybe people don't think about that may make it unsafe for students to be in school if there's no internet?
So we have a lot of security cameras, and those security cameras are accessed locally. So with the internet down, it wouldn't prevent local staff from using those cameras, but it would prevent our remote resources like the 911 center from seeing those cameras and that content being available to any emergency response or anything like that. So we'd kind of be, from a help perspective, we'd be flying blind. Mm-hmm. And then we have security systems. A lot of those have backups and cellular and things like that, so probably wouldn't be impacted too much.
So as those rumors start to fly that among students that the system was attacked, there's a cyber attack, etc., and they start calling their parents, what happens if the internet's out and the parents start to call the school?
So ultimately, they would have to have an answer. They would need to know, have a plan worked out so that they could respond and calm and reassure the parents, for sure.
So how, with that, how dependent are most school districts' phone systems on the internet?
In today's age with voice over IP, there's a good chance that their phone lines are coming in over that internet connection as well. I know ours are coming in over a circuit, and I think that's riding over our internet connection. Mm-hmm. And so if we lose connectivity to that, we lose phones, we lose a lot of communication.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking from the point of view of a classroom teacher, I've got 30 kids in my class, and if a parent comes to check out one of those kids and the office can't call me to let me know, or even before that, because all of our student schedule information is in the student information system online, the office can't even look up schedules for the students. Mm. So if 100 students show up or 100 parents show up to check out their students all at once, it's chaos because you have to use intercom all calls or some form of mass communication in the building. And having experience at a very small scale, it's very chaotic very quickly. So that kind of deals with what things look like for communication and smooth flow. And it's a black eye on the district when 100 parents show up and you can't tell them where your kids are. So from a PR perspective, that's kind of a nightmare.
Sure, and our cellular signal inside the buildings is atrocious, and so being able to rely on cellular communication to get to the teachers, and we currently have a model where all of the kids are not allowed to use personal cell phones and devices, so parents wouldn't be able to reach them directly, which would cause even more insecurity with parents.
Right, yeah, because there's multiple states this year enacted laws that students, can't have devices, depending on the state, either state or the school, from bell to bell or during the school day period. So lots of considerations there. So all of those kind of factors play into that question of, will school continue when something like this happens? Questions for a technology director. Maybe things like, how do you coordinate with the internet service provider, and estimate restoration time? How are you coordinating with your team to give that ISP things they need if they need an assist? I know in a fiber cut, I'm pretty much tasking my network administrator, James, with, anything that he can do to facilitate them getting back online, whether it's, showing them where closets are, showing them fiber routes, whatever it may be. Because we've had different experiences with having ISP providers who know exactly what's going on and exactly where everything is, and those who very heavily lean on you to point them in the right direction. So, making those staffing decisions, coordinating people, and then, if we have a contingency plan, activating it. Like, at what level do we say, okay, we're gonna move to this, we're gonna do paper-based attendance, whatever. So those are very local decisions about what we can do to facilitate learning without the internet. And then, explaining and communicating to staff. So if I can't send an email to all staff, how do I communicate? And what needs to be communicated? Because I don't want to overwhelm people with a bunch of technical details. And in this scenario, maybe one update would be enough, because once we know that there is a fiber cut, that's kind of definitive. So they have the problem, they have the timeline. So not really a big issue in this scenario, but in a more drawn out scenario, there's going to need to be ongoing communication. And then how would I plan to update stakeholders? So, and for me in this scenario, I'm probably going to be using my cell phone to send text message and phone calls over my cell carrier to communicate with principals, superintendent, communications directors, etc.
Well, especially since our email is hosted online.
Right. Yeah. So it would be a fun experiment sometime to come in and do a day of work and just record how many things are dependent on the internet. Or I guess it'd be easier to record how many things aren't dependent on the internet.
Right.
Because everything we touch goes back to the internet at some point, basically. James, from your perspective, we're going to be asking you things like, what steps do you need to take to confirm the issue is external and not internal? So as we're going through that timeline.
So we have a pretty robust fiber network and network between all of our campuses, and a lot of the fiber we own as a district. And so I have visibility to see what all sites are down, what all communication is actually broken. And so I'm going to be heavily reliant on all of those tools to really quickly find it. And then once I've ultimately decided, oh, this is outside of our internal network and the fiber cut has actually impacted our service providers, then I'm going to be contacting those providers, asking them, reporting the outage, getting some type of urgent response to that. We have 2 internet service providers and we have 2 different sites. And so in our situation, the internet going down is really, really problematic, because that means that it's impacted at just the perfect point for the fiber cut.
Yes.
And so figuring that out and just kind of hounding them to get going, because of how our network is laid out. I'm probably going to be looking for how do I get the internet again, because I feel like it's like oxygen to our district and just to our daily lives. And so is there a way that I could come up with MacGyver something, a solution to get some amount of internet, even if it was in a really, really limited scope, so that we had just email working.
Right.
And then I could maybe use the firewall to limit what actual traffic can go out on that temporary solution. Our stuff is hosted in a co-location center, and so we have partners that we could possibly backdoor another connection and use their internet services if ours were down, or look at could we get anything at a given site, because all of our sites are visible from each other, so we could probably bring up some type of internet connection over cellular, do something. That would be my main focus in life, would be reporting, letting you know what's the plan and how could I change the outcome to give us connectivity sooner than what the provider is going to do. But also managing expectations to say, if it's 48 hours of no internet, is that something where we would say, do we do a home school day?
Right.
You know,
yes.
our network is set up, our students one-to-one devices, and our teachers and everybody have devices that they could take to the house, and they could get on their home internet and they could teach.
Right.
And we could do a remote day. I mean, we've had experience with doing that because of ice and wintertime, crazy weather, heck, wind.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So that's an option as well.
Yeah. And so you mentioned a lot of work that you're going to be doing in this scenario. How do you corral and use other people in the department to help out?
Well, I know initially I'm going to be talking to the local techs. So most of our schools have some local tech presence, and so I'm going to reach out to them and find out, can you be my eyes and ears and hands to confirm, is the internet down, is the power out, like trying to understand, because you don't know when a fiber. I know we've already established that the fiber cut has happened, but when we very first find out, then I'm looking for help to run around and just check and confirm. And so usually it's an all hands on deck for whatever kind of emergency or large scale problem that we have in the department across the district. Everybody drops what they're doing and says, how can I help?
Yeah, and you bring one of the things that's actually easier for us in this scenario is geographically, we're only distributed over like a 4 or 5 square mile area. But I've worked in districts where, you know, there are hundreds of square miles. So we at least have the luxury of being close together. So you could drive to all those sites if you wanted to, but that would be all you're doing.
Right.
is driving to sites. So
yeah, and I've found that if I'm sitting at my computer, I have the best reach possible for all of our systems. And if I get in the car, I'm the only one that's looking at all of those systems, and I'm no longer looking. I'm driving to a site. And usually if I'm driving to a site, it's because I've figured out I have to go there to fix the problem.
That's a good point. So in our scenario, you know, as we work down the timeline, we get to the point where we know that it's a fiber cut and we know what the resolution time is and everyone has been communicated with. That should take a lot of pressure off. But at that point, what are you doing to start to prepare to restore systems once everything's back online? Do you have any special kind of things that you have to take care of or worry about? Or is it just flipping a switch and it's back?
If in this scenario with a fiber cut, it's pretty much waiting until they splice the fiber. And so when they get the crew that comes in and digs up the fiber and then puts in extra fiber to essentially repair that break, and they have to cross connect all of those individual fibers. And then once our link is up, I can just validate that, hey, services are restored. And it's pretty easy on my side because none of our equipment is actually changed.
Right. Cool. So the next person that you may have on this discussion would be the communications director. So we're getting out of the technology people. Because again, I want to stress that something like this isn't a technology problem. It's just a problem. We all have to hands in accordingly. So things that the communications director may be involved with are things like what messaging should go out to the parents and the community, and through what methods and what timeline. So it may be the communications director having to go to a coffee shop down the street to get online to access all of the different resources that they use for newsletters, social media, SMS messages, all those kinds of things. And, especially in a situation where there are rumors about what's going on and maybe wanting to control that narrative or the spin of what's being propagated online is, how do you address that? How do you correct that misinformation? And then I guess maybe this question's out of order, but as you're deciding how to communicate, you have to determine what communication channels are available. How can you communicate? Like I mentioned, go to the coffee shop. And then we talked about this previously is, finding that balance of transparency where you're not overwhelming people with information or with technical details, but that at the end of the day, the parents aren't sitting at home saying, they didn't tell me enough. I was worried because I didn't know what was going on. So that'll be the communication director's role. Facilities, probably the closest one tied into this besides technology. So what are some things, are you going to be working with the facilities director as this is going on, James?
There's a really good chance because a lot of the systems that they oversee are also accessed via the network. And so our HVAC systems, our freezers, refrigerators, even water pressure, like everything is being monitored and sending some type of alert. And a lot of those systems, they don't know that the fiber was cut. They just know that the alerts are no longer coming. And so then they're panicked, is this system down?
Right.
When the freezers go offline, then you say, what are we going to lose from the food? But if the water pressure drops, then you say, do we have the capacity to provide restrooms and water and things like that to a school? And so a lot of times facilities are responding with kind of an emergency standpoint because they're thinking worst case scenario and how am I going to get this fixed?
Yeah, and they're really coming at this from the same perspective of technology of how do we keep school safe enough for students to be in school. Theirs is just with a more physical, like you mentioned, the water. Like we send kids home and the bathrooms don't work. So, those kinds of things all play a role. And so talking to the facilities director about also their communication with the construction crew. So, because most likely our facilities director is our point of contact who's going to be working with the construction company, working with them. And sometimes, well, actually, I don't know this, James. So say that a construction company cuts our fiber. Who is going to be the actual group repairing that? Is it going to be the ISP? Will it be someone from the construction company? Will it be someone from a third party that we work with? Is there a rule for that, or is it, I don't know, what's your thought?
Usually with an ISP, you're calling them. Okay, so it comes down to somebody owns the fiber. Somebody owns the physical plant, they call it, or the wiring or whatever. And so at some level, that's going to be reported to the owner of that transport so that they can start the process of fixing it. Every ISP has a different process for it, and our ISPs are national providers, and so they've probably got local agreements, and they may be buying those services that ride that physical connectivity, and so contacting them, and they probably not probably, they have a playbook
Right.
to follow and say, okay, the fiber's been cut. These are the support numbers that I call. These are the reference information that they need to quickly respond to it. If a construction company cuts the fiber, they're going to want to find out who owns it and who do we need to call. And usually they're going to be at fault. And therefore, they're going to ultimately pay for it. But in some cases, they may have, if it's a fiber that is like, a 6-pair fiber, and they cut it, they can call a local IT company and have them come out, splice it, fix it, and go back to work. I've heard of fiber cuts like Dallas, Texas, where if a construction company cuts a main fiber that could have hundreds of fibers, I've seen a fine of like $1 million a minute that the fiber is down because it's costing billions of dollars of industry and business and everything else in loss, and from what services that they're providing and all that. We don't have paid subscribers, so to reel it back in, ultimately you're looking at finding out who owns it, and then that service provider is going to start getting somebody to repair it. And if they have a local team or if they subcontract a local company to do it for them, it's all kind of based off of their playbook.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Good to know. Some other things the facilities director may be concerned with, and I know for us, we're blessed with a facilities director who's very hands-on and very much wants to help people. And so you can be asking questions about, like, how can the facilities director help support the school sites with logistics while technology is unavailable? So that's something, if they're thinking through things like that in a scenario like this ahead of time, when something happens, they're better poised to, act on those things they've previously thought about. So that's really the whole point of Tabletops, is to make it so that you're thinking through these scenarios when you're not in the fog of war, when you're clearly thinking, you're not under pressure, you have people to brainstorm with and to bat ideas around with. That way, when it actually happens, you're not encountering the situation for the first time. So being able to preload an actual event with people thinking of, what am I going to do in this scenario, is really helpful. And that's worth every penny that you're paying to do a tabletop, which, since tabletops are free, it's a super, super great deal anyway. So next role, actually, that's all the roles we have. So kind of at the end, after you kind of talk through all these roles, you would want to debrief with everybody involved and say, okay, so we did this tabletop, we talked through this scenario. What are some things that worked well? What are some things that we already had procedures in place for, that when I said, hey, when this happens, and you were immediately like, oh, I know how to do that, or I know what my role will be. But then on the opposite is, when we ask questions during the tabletop, were there things that you're like, I don't know. If this happens, what do I do? So if we can identify these gaps after the exercise, then that puts us in a better place to be able to respond without having that gap in reality. So in this particular scenario, James, since it's really in your domain, what are some things you might talk about with how a district could improve their resilience for future outages based on the discussion? And you alluded to it a little bit, but what are some things in that discussion, kind of debrief, would you talk about things that we could do as a district to help you to be able to improve future resilience?
I think, as a site, like as a principal at a location, them understanding their piece of the whole playbook, to understand, like, how can I assist making sure that we are going to get back online, and how do I assist determining where to focus time, because our site's fine. So, like, if whatever the quickest outcome that they can assist with and understand, so that they're not in a panic, they're not getting hit sideways with, oh no, I've never experienced this before, what do I do? Versus, oh, we got this, we've spoke about this before, and I know exactly who to call, because essentially every single site needs to think about what do I do when the internet drops?
Right.
Because they need to have like a micro playbook of their site to understand how do I determine what it is. Even if that playbook is, I call support. Like, you know, I report it, I turn in a ticket, and then I kind of move on because we have a plan when there's no internet. And if they have that already covered, then they just know, okay, cool, this is a low-tech instructional day, and we've already planned for that, so we're good.
Right. And you've dropped the word playbook a couple times. Can you help explain kind of what you mean by a playbook?
I think it's kind of a reference guide when you're in the fog of war. You mentioned when you're in the middle of some kind of an outage, panic can set in because you're thinking about all the worst case scenarios. And if you have a checklist that you go by and reference that you know works, everybody agrees to it, then you figured out and tweaked it so that this is the most efficient way to get to resolution, then you can write that up. So when our fiber was cut recently at the high school during a construction project, we ultimately knew who to call and report it to them so that they could look at, how do I fix this? That turned into we've got to replace the fiber because the route was no longer going to work because they're building a whole new parking lot and everything. So we had to reroute that connection. And so we kind of referenced the playbook that we had and then looked for gaps to come up with, how would we do that different? How could we be more efficient and going forward?
And one thing you mentioned in there that I really want to highlight is you mentioned knowing who to call. Having that list of names and phone numbers in your playbook is crucially important, because if you can't look up a phone number online, or you can't look up a contact online, or you can't search your email for a history of who you talked to at XYZ company, you're kind of up a creek. So, so that's really important. Second thing I wanted to ask about playbooks is, where does a playbook exist, or where should a playbook exist? Should it just be like in your OneDrive?
It's a fantastic question. And I think from a redundancy standpoint, it probably has to match up with how important is it for recovery, right? So if you're gonna follow a playbook to get the internet working, then it would make sense that you wouldn't have it stored on the internet.
Right, exactly. Yep.
And so do you have a redundant copy that you've downloaded to your computer? You know, because if power goes out, then you're like, oh, shoot, I can't get to my computer, so I can't get to that phone number and whatever. So having redundant copies of playbooks, however we would facilitate that, is really important. A printed copy of the most critical things.
Right.
And having that playbook on what to do, where they can flip it open. If I jump to airplanes, they have thought of all the different possible scenarios that could ever happen. Their tabletop exercises are exhaustive, and anything that goes on in the cabin of the plane, they flip out a binder, they jump to that section, and then they follow it step by step.
Right.
Because when adrenaline hits, you cannot guarantee you're going to remember every single minute detail and every single step that you need to do. And we're not in a plane.
Right.
We're not going to be in that situation, but there can be adrenaline pumping things when your day changes all of the sudden. And power is one that's like easy to do, because power goes out and you go, uh-oh, I got to worry about safety. I've got to worry about all kinds of things, because cameras are down and maybe door access is down and we're walking around in the dark. And how are we going to navigate? Even if we were to release everybody to go home, how's all that going to work?
Right. All valid. All this has kind of led into this question of, closing out your exercise with what lessons can we take from this that we can apply to other situations. So, in a tabletop, you're picking one specific scenario like we did. but the aspect of losing internet could be a part of multiple different scenarios. And so, even though we just focused on this one very simple scenario, there are lessons that can apply to other catastrophes. So that's kind of a good question to leave with your group in the exercise.
Well, and I will say one more thing on that is the hardest thing in a tabletop exercise is staying on point.
Right.
Because you're saying, what do we do if the fiber's cut? I'm, as a network person, reeling from where? Like, which fiber's
right.
cut? Because I've got a lot of them.
Yeah.
And then it makes me think of all of these other things. So to your point, that one exercise can kind of build out to lots of different thoughts, staying on target so that you can maximize the efficiency and ultimately the results from that one conversation is going to be paramount to having a successful tabletop exercise. Noting all of those things at the end that you thought of can turn into future and feed the pool of future tabletop exercises and conversations.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us to our closing. It's talking about ways that you can level up tabletops. So, like I mentioned, like the goal today was to use a really simple scenario to demystify the tabletop process, to take away some of the scary of, one thing that's naturally scary for someone, say a technology director who wants to conduct a tabletop and they want to pull in all the stakeholders, that puts you center stage, as the conductor for the director of schools, all these other directors. And so that can be daunting. So we wanted to demystify that and really just show that it's really just a conversation talking about what you would do in a disaster. But ways that you can level that up and maybe make it a little bit more complicated, maybe a little bit more meaningful, maybe a little bit more interesting, is you could use AI for interactivity. So you could tell, so first of all, today's scenario was generated by Mr. ChatGPT, but you could just as easily say, okay, AI chatbot, I want to do a tabletop exercise. I want to do a scenario. Can you help formulate da-da-da-da-da? But then you can say, and walk us through the tabletop like you're the one who is orchestrating the exercise. And the AI can throw you scenarios as you go. It can adjust. It can say, okay, you've just been notified the fiber's been cut. And the AI can say, what do you do? And you can answer the AI and say, well, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And respond to the chatbot, and then we'll reply and say, okay, that's a good idea. You should have done this, or have you considered this, or great idea. And you can really get some instant feedback using AI in that exercise. Another thing you can do is switch roles. So one thing that I've done in a tabletop before is I've assumed the role of communications director. And that's helped me to see things from the perspective of what they would be looking for. And then same thing for, having a communications director assume the role of superintendent. So they're thinking about what the superintendent would be thinking about. And just kind of using that, putting yourself in other people's shoes to see the scenario from a more 360 perspective. And then finally, you can always make a tabletop more like a role-playing game or choose your own adventure by having, the equivalent of a dungeon master. And so instead of having the scenario and the timeline laid out, you could have a person who knows the scenario and they could walk you through all the steps of it. And you could do it interactively, kind of like with the AI, but with, basically a storyteller in your group who is leading you through the scenario instead of it just being a discussion. So that, that's a little bit more immersive, a little bit more impactful. So, if you have anyone on your staff that's, they've got that dungeon master personality, they could be very well suited for this kind of role. So any other thoughts as we're kind of wrapping up, James?
I think you've touched on several really good things, but one that stands out is making the experience worth it for the stakeholders so that they feel like they walked away better off and would look forward to a future session.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because this isn't something you're going to do once in isolation. So ideally, this should be happening on a regular cadence with different scenarios. Very, very excellent point. So I think that's all I have, James. Unless you have any other parting thoughts. I already asked you a parting thought, so
no. This
parting thought.
This has been good. This is fun, and I think it could add a lot of benefit. And
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for talking today.